everyone. Welcome to WeSpire Live. We're going to be getting started in a couple minutes. So grab, if you're on the West Coast, your coffee. If you are on the East Coast, your lunch. And if you're Europe, I know what I'd be grabbing. You decide. And we'll get ready to go. If you're starting to join, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. And because it is freaking hot in a lot of this country, tell us your favorite frozen treat that's keeping you cool these days in this summer. All right, Pete, what's your favorite?
I was just trying to think of that.
Ben and Jerry's cookie dough, Adam. Nice.
Cookie dough, yeah. 108. Good night. That's hot. Yeah. I like the little fans that you can bring to the beach that blow that mist the water at you. So I'm sure there's a lot more interesting, fun drinks people are going to come up with.
Yeah. Rita's Italian Ice. Debbie, I love it. I love it. I have shared mine in the chat. The greatest invention in the history of cocktails, the frosé.
Right.
All right. So for those of you just joining us, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. And we are so looking forward to having you here with us today. So settle in and please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're coming from. And we are empathizing with many of our colleagues who are in parts of this country that are roasting. And so please share with us one way, your favorite frozen treat that you are staying cool in this hot summer. Great. All right, it is 12 o'clock, so we are going to get started. Lauren, welcome. It is so wonderful to have you. Pete, it is so wonderful to have you. And welcome everybody to WeSpire Live. Couple housekeeping notes before we get started. First and foremost, we are recording this session, right, Adam? So many of you have signed up. We have over 1,000 people that have registered. We are super excited about that. And we know some of you are going to be live. Some of you are watching this after. We do encourage you to join live because it's always a lot of fun and you get to ask your questions. But we are happy to catch you anytime you have time around this. Second thing, there is a way to ask questions in the Q&A. Please send those our way. We will try to answer. We try to leave about 20 minutes at the end for questions, or we might even in the middle if something kind of comes up that we think we should address there, we'll pop it right out. Don't hesitate to put comments, likes in the chat. The reactions and emojis are always fun. So if you agree with something we're saying, if you disagree with something we're saying, practice using those emojis. And so with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, many of you know me, Susan Hunt-Stevens. I would normally introduce myself to this crowd as founder and CEO of WeSpire, but I now am the president of WeSpire and the SVP of engagement for Bonterra, a very exciting evolution in WeSpire's journey where we are joining forces with the world's fastest growing social good technology company. And in my estimation, knowing everyone in the industry, my favorite group of people and just a super impressive group of people who have come together to do Bonterra. And you're going to get to hear a lot more about that from Pete Karns today. And you also are getting 3 people who probably spend more time and energy thinking about the future of CSR and how you build great products to engage employees in CSR and social impact on this planet. And so it's an incredibly fun opportunity to connect you all with Lauren and Pete and me to talk about what are we seeing coming? What are best practices? What would we do if we were in your shoes to take your program to the next level? So I'm going to start by having us all learn a little bit more about Bonterra. And joining me today is Pete Karns. He's the SVP of Corporate Strategy, but he has a deep background in social impact from Cybergrants, which was one of the first companies that came together around Bonterra. And I've been blessed to know Pete in the industry and respect his work immensely. And we've shared joint customers and worked together collaboratively for years. So it's really fun to be colleagues, Pete. So why don't you tell everyone here about Bonterra and the broader vision, not only for Bonterra as a company, but for how WeSpire and cyber grants fit into that vision.
Oh, great. And thank you all for joining today. And always appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations. I think the hard part is going to be keeping us within our time, Susan, because I think the three of us can have some pretty passionate conversations. So let's start with Bonterra. Just a couple of facts. So one, Bonterra has a very unique perspective in this ecosystem. Essentially, we serve different elements of the social good ecosystem. So we have solutions that are in the workplace that help our workplaces engage employees in time and money and grant making. We have solutions that serve nonprofits and enable them to digitally fundraise or manage volunteers or manage their donors and advocacy. We have solutions that are actually used for service delivery for nonprofits at the point of impact in places like domestic violence shelters or youth centers or in the community. Among many other things. And what that means is we have this unbelievable perch to see the flow of information, the inefficiencies, the opportunities in the ecosystem, whether we're talking about individuals who are looking to engage, how the flow of resources moves to nonprofits and social good organizations, how information comes back. And the real purpose of Bonterra is to serve our clients as best as we can today and in the future in those individual domains like CSR, but really to use our capability and our viewpoint and frankly our scale to try to address some real opportunities in the ecosystem. You know, one of the things that really motivates us, for those that follow the industry, you know that giving, for all intents and purposes, has remained a pretty flat 2% of GDP since 1950. And while it goes up with GDP, and it might go up or down a little bit, and we know recently there's less donors, there's more high net worth donors, but it's a pretty consistent 2%. It's not enough. So how do we unlock more resource? That's something that motivates us a lot. So that's a little bit about Bonterra. Again, I could talk all day about that, but the key, we're in multiple places in the ecosystem. We work very closely with our clients to evolve where they are today, but we're really focused on solving some of the more interesting opportunities to lift the industry. Relative to where WeSpire fits, to your second question, you know, it's a couple things. Bonterra, by definition of what we do, is very much in the business of helping our clients engage individuals. That could be in the workplace, in the community, in a political campaign, wherever it might be. And WeSpire has tremendous expertise in the science of engagement, in the practice of engagement, whether that's in programs like giving time and money to nonprofits, sustainability programs, well-being programs, et cetera. So we've been a fan of WeSpire for some time, and we think the knowledge, the experience, the know-how is a really great add for Bonterra and how we'll use that going forward. The other thing that we're excited about is there's many companies that have been doing CSR for some time. You might say some are on Gen 2 or Gen 3 or more of their strategy. Due to a lot of factors over the past several years, we have a lot of newer companies or mid-sized companies that are new to CSR. And that's also something that we're really excited about bringing WeSpire into the Bonterra family, because we can serve a broader population. So both our enterprise clients with a broader set of capabilities, but also newer entrants to CSR, which really need assistance in getting their programs off the ground. So quick summary there, Susan, but again, super excited to have you part of the family.
Yeah, well, we're really excited to be here. And one of the things that was most interesting as we were starting to think about joining forces was having that access to so many not-for-profits, and particularly knowing how many of our customers are really trying to go beyond measuring dollars and measuring hours, and really looking at what are those dollars and what are those hours doing, and are they having an impact? And we've obviously been really good at helping them understand how the employee participation is driving HR impact. But I think all of us are wrestling to really come up with a better way to, and more efficient and more scalable way to measure that that impact. And I think that's one of the really exciting opportunities in this ecosystem as well, is really cracking and being best in class for helping organizations measure the environmental, the social, and the business impact of their programs. And someone who is on the front lines of actually needing to make all of this happen is our second guest today, Lauren McCarthy. She is the VP of Product for the CSR division of Bonterra, and has an extraordinary background both in the CSR technology industry and in other technology companies that are not tied into CSR. And Lauren, I would love for you to share with everyone some of the trends that you are seeing in the CSR space that you've been watching most closely and that you think Bonterra is uniquely positioned to support, particularly if WeSpire is helping with that.
Sure. I think sort of when I think about trends overall and what we're sort of keeping an eye on, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more sort of second point to how that fits in with Bonterra and what we're doing. But I think just trends overall, I think, Susan, you mentioned social impact as you were talking, and that to me is really, I think, the area to think about is how do we help companies better talk about, prioritize, communicate social impact and measure it. Recently, like Patagonia was just named the most respected brand in the world by like an Axios Harris poll. Why? Because they are very, very committed to making impact in terms of environmental and then social causes, and also really having their employees be part of that mission. So I think for companies, for brands, how do you tell that really compelling story and center what you're doing around social impact? And it's not so much just to sort of talk the story, but how do you measure it and turn sort of the quantifiable data? How many hours volunteered? How many gifts did you make? How many, how did you reduce your carbon footprint, right? Like, how does all those measures sort of add up to say, here's what we're doing as a company, and here's why that matters to our communities, to our employees, to our stakeholders, and to our shareholders, frankly, our investors. So I think that's like number one to me is like social impact. How do we harness that better? How do we measure it? How do we tell stories? And all of that sort of in service of how do we drive participation and sort of hit on that, how do we increase 2% GDP point that Pete mentioned. So I'll get to that too. I think the other thing we're seeing, or and I think, Susan, this is where WeSpire, I think, has a great opportunity and positioning, is the types of companies who are starting to engage in these conversations or realize that employee engagement and social impact is truly becoming table stakes, and making sort of impact programs available to their employees, whether you're a 25-person company or you're a 100, 200,000 person company, right? Everybody wants to be part of an organization these days that is driving some sort of impact and some sort of social good impact, right? I think in the last 3 to 5 years, that's certainly what we've seen. But before I came to Bonterra, I worked at another sort of 1,000-person privately held company during sort of the pandemic and George Floyd and the reversal of Roe and sort of everything that we saw kind of emerging in 2020 and beyond. And in that short amount of time span, we went from a company that didn't really have any, I would say, strong philanthropic presence to, or employee engagement presence, to starting to see more and more demand from employees of, hey, what are we doing as a company to address reproductive rights? What are we doing as a company to address George Floyd? What are we doing as a company to address this disaster that's unfolding in another part of the globe? But like, I am feeling very much that I want to be able to help. And in that 6-month window of time, as a smaller company, we rolled out an employee giving program, a corporate grant making program, a ERG program to sort of allow employee resource group program to allow employees to sort of understand where they fit in the organization. We hired a diversity officer. So you just saw in this very rapid period of time, that evolution and that sort of explosion where that's what people were asking for. So I think that's, super important, impactful, and is again becoming table stakes to most of you all probably on the phone and on this call and to all of us. And I think, Susan, you've seen something similar sort of in your role at WeSpire, where also we're seeing employees that are coming from much larger organizations where this has been in place for a long time, or maybe moving to smaller companies, as we've seen lots of people shift jobs in the last couple of years. And I think they're bringing and demanding that as well. So I don't know if you want to share some of what you've seen.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. We've had a number of new clients come to us and say, we got this influx of people from insert large technology company here or consumer packaged goods company here. And they are saying, wait, at our company, we were volunteering in the community and we were, actively giving, and we had, employee resource groups. Why don't we have them here? And, and I don't think it was ever an active act of not having them by leadership. It was almost not even realizing how important it is to employees. And so I think recognizing that employees, perhaps catalyzed not only by the scale of the problems the world is facing, to your point, that you mentioned a number that are near and dear to our hearts. But I think also this recognition that business really can and should be a force for good in this world. And if you're going to attract and retain talent, and we certainly see this in our data, you have got to be able to say to somebody coming out of an MBA program or a PhD program or a university what you're doing, because they just expect it. It's become almost like table stakes to have these programs to attract. And if you don't, it's like, well, why not? Are you against these things? And so I think that's changed. The other thing that we are more exposed to probably day in and day out through our work in sustainability is the regulatory framework changes that are happening. And particularly in Europe with the EU CSRD regulations. So it's not just European companies, it's any American company who has any significant scale of operations, either revenue or people into Europe, now is having to report out against an integrated set of metrics. It's not just their carbon emissions, but it's really, what would get called ESG metrics by investors here. And so those regulatory tailwinds are forcing a lot of companies to go from having programs that may have been, sort of soft and squishy and hard to measure and well attended sometimes, not others, low participation rates in some cases, high in others, but now they've got to report against it. And, my favorite line is you can't manage what you don't measure. But once you start to measure it, now you know how well you're doing and you generally are going to want to improve it. And I think we're seeing that a lot. And that trend is coming to the US as well. It's behind and slower, but you still have 13,000 companies reporting out on, whether that's CVP or even more against GRI and some of the other frameworks. And depending on what happens, I think that regulatory driver is going to be another thing that certainly for public companies, but even large companies owned by large private equity firms, it's just going to be something that they have to handle. So Pete, back to you. You've been in this industry a long time and working on hard problems and solving hard problems in that time. But what do you think some of the hardest problems are that remain to be solved? And what do you think Bonterra and WeSpire can take the lead in addressing these issues? Where do you really see the opportunity for incredible leadership? Because I know I see it, but where do you see it, and how can we help folks who are on this webinar assume that leadership position, knowing how many people want to be there?
So let me give three thoughts from I think the key stakeholders in our CSR ESG world today. So one, the people on the front lines designing, running programs on the whole. And, we see, we've got, I think 60 of the Fortune 100, we've got a lot of clients, large and small, between Bonterra and WeSpire. And one very clear trend is just more with less. More demand for different programs, run more programs in response to X or Y event, in addition to your sustaining type programs. And we see a tremendous opportunity and frankly, kind of a responsibility to enable the day-to-day program leaders, the administrators. Now, some of that is through product, simpler administration. Some of that's through content, rapid launch programs, things of that nature. But there's a real need to, unlock more activity by enabling our program leaders to move with more speed and to measure how things are going. Should we continue to run this program? How should we evolve this? Is this working? Are we seeing the results? So that, to your point about measure what, manage what you measure, that's important. So that's kind of bucket number one is, and it's not so much about making people's lives easier. That's nice. How do we deliver more impact outcomes for the resources that are being deployed? And we think we can play a big role in that together. Second, this industry has a time-tested problem of a donor who wants to do something but doesn't know how. I care about this cause. Who should I give to? I want to use my voice in this. How do I do that? I just made a gift. How can I amplify that with a match? All these different scenarios. And there's a tremendous problem of visibility, and then a downstream problem sometimes of trust. How do I know this organization is going to, have a benefit and an outcome from what I'm doing here? So we see that visibility and trust as I would call it more of an opportunity to, again, engage more people in the process, and unlock more of those resources for the organizations that can then turn that into an outcome. So that's number two. And then number three, which is related, and Lauren, which is touching on this, I think one of the real opportunities that the industry has, and this manifests itself in different inefficiencies, is really to better instrument, measure, and make more efficient of the chain of impact. So grant maker makes a gift, strings are attached. How does that data get reported? Is it different by grant maker? We all know the challenges with impact measurement. How do we really address that? And that is a very long conversation with lots of ins and outs.
You could have a whole webinar just based on that.
Among many other things. But that chain of impact, again, we're all more likely, whether we're a grant maker or an individual donor, to become a sustaining or a reoccurring participant if we believe there's a positive outcome, and whatever that outcome may be. And I think we all want to, one thing we see more, whether it's capacity building or just a focus on the root cause, it's a lot of focus on symptoms. How do we solve problems? How do we get to the root, right? And knowing what that is and how to redirect resources there is important. So the impact measures that are out there today, I think, are largely well-intended, but it can be done a lot better. And we're a technology company, and we're going to bring technology to bear to solve that problem.
Well, and I think that part about being a technology company, we've had experience, particularly, for example, when we started to roll out inclusive culture, of bringing, employee resource groups onto technology. And on the one hand, it's amazing because it democratizes essentially the ability to create and publish activities, connect with members, communicate, catalyze, and all of that, what an employee resource group is doing. And so it's an incredible tool for the leaders, for the members, et cetera. One of the things that we didn't anticipate was that it also highlighted for some customers when an employee resource group wasn't doing anything, because there were no activities, there were no meetings, and then it's a question of, well, is that true, or is that they just haven't made the change to put it on the technology? In some cases it's the change management, but in some cases it was that it was really a list, and there really wasn't an experience being delivered that was going to have an outcome to improve inclusion and belonging in a workplace. And that was a big eye opener, and something that we, in even the process of working with prospective customers, have had conversations to say, be prepared that one of the things that putting this on technology may uncover is there isn't much there. And be prepared. What are you going to do? How are you going to resource that? What are because it brings transparency to things that you weren't able to see before. And so, you end up, interestingly enough, the technology has a facilitation, but it also can uncover some insights that require a response. And it's been a fascinating journey on that front to learn, and then be able to put in place, what ways we can help. So how do we help improve and support, our affinity groups or our ERGs.
But just to that point, even better to know something's not happening than just assume and let it ride, right? One of the interesting things, and I'll just be very quick on this. We talk a lot about participation, and I think we'll celebrate going from 4 to 8% or 8 to 10%. I would encourage our participants on the phone today to on the webcast today to maybe flip that. Think about your non-participants. How many non-participants? What is your non-participation percentage? And then of that, what is your first timer? Even if you just we look at participation, great. What's your percent of new versus recurring? Look at these things a little bit differently as you adjust your programming to pull more folks in versus, and by the way, we should all celebrate participation. But as we try to pull more people in, sometimes look at the same question through a different lens. I love non-participation rates and getting into that because it really opens a door into why not.
Well, and it spoken like a true head of strategy, because one of the most important principles of innovation is to study your non-users. And interestingly enough, given combining of forces, that was one of the things that we did before adding giving into the WeSpire platform, is really studied why aren't people giving? What is standing in the way of giving? And that's one of the reasons that we kind of came into this space, yes, supporting what people need to do, but really trying to take a different tact and say, what if we flip the model, and instead of waiting for an employee to give and matching, what if we say to a company, how much of your dollars do you want to go towards employee directed giving, of your pool? Do you want 20% of it to be employee directed, 30%? Let's syndicate that out to employees and then activate them to make those donations and then add extra on top of it. What would happen if we did that? And that's where all of a sudden we saw this model go from 15% of employees participating to 70-75% of employees participating, and that's exciting. And that unlocks at scale billions of dollars, but it requires everyone to rethink what they mean by giving. And it's kind of fascinating to do that. Lauren, I'm going to move it over to you now, because you are tasked with figuring out not only how WeSpire and the cyber grants platform work really well together, but also making all this work within this context of the larger Bonterra vision. And it's been a hot 7 weeks. So I know it's still very early days. But, what excites you about putting these things together? What's daunting about putting these things together?
So I want to address that, because I definitely have thoughts there, but I actually want to just go back to your last point about sort of employee directed giving, because I think that actually is an interesting way to think about WeSpire and cyber grants together in that context, in terms of like participation in ERGs, which we're super excited to leverage the WeSpire ERG capabilities. So thinking about that, though, that's a really interesting way of saying, how do you leverage those ERGs? And you think about the outcomes that you hopefully are tying to them, right? I led an ERG at my last company for women in tech. We worked with like girls who code in the elementary schools, right? But like that was our self-directed. It would be amazing if we had been given budget or some funding that we could have also applied to that to sort of double our impact, from not just volunteering and not just sort of hosting events, but to also like tying that to corporate philanthropy and more impact to that organization. So I think that's just a good example of where those two things can come together. So, but going back to your original question, which is sort of tied to it, is like, how do we sort of work together, and how do we sort of knit these two organizations together? Again, very early days, but when I think about not only WeSpire and cyber grants, but I think about it in the broader context of Bonterra and sort of taking off some of the things that Pete had mentioned at the top of the webinar, I really get excited about, as you can tell, impact measurement. Like it literally is like what I think about all day and read about when I'm not working. I think this is where Bonterra, and I think having WeSpire join the Bonterra family is uniquely positioned, because we serve across Bonterra for sort of critical audiences in the social good economy, as we want to think about it, or the social good landscape. We have the nonprofits, which you've talked about. We have what we sort of call the funders, which I think are all of us on the corporate side, also the foundation side, high net worth individuals, but the people who are really funding sort of strategic initiatives and are funding social good directly. We have participants. So these are the folks who are actually receiving services from our nonprofit organizations. These are the folks who might be going to a food pantry, or who might be part of a community resource and receiving benefits from them. And then the fourth one, which is really sort of, I think, the center of it all, well, with nonprofits, is supporters. So these are the folks, these could be employees, these are individual donors, these are individual volunteers, these are the people who are actually using their sort of time, treasure is another way to say it, time and money, really, and energy to try to make an impact in whatever way. Maybe it's only a $5 contribution, maybe it's 5 hours of volunteerism, but using their own personal resources to make an impact. So that's kind of how we think about it at Bonterra. So big sort of taking a step back. I think the more we can start to understand by working with each other and across this landscape, understanding the dynamics that drive the different behaviors and decision-making across these 4 audiences will help us better drive that social impact. So, Pete mentioned the 2% GDP. Can we find a way to juice, right, this whole ecosystem and increase that and make a more significant impact? But more importantly, impact is just a word. Like, how do we actually put quantifiable metrics together? How do we say, hey, how do we better kind of, I guess, connect the nonprofit organizations with the funders to say, what are the causes that are most impactful or meaningful to your mission as a company? What are the causes that are most important to your employees? How do we actually show how many beds were filled at your nonprofit organization in your community? How many meals were distributed? How many families did you serve? And how do we make that easier? I think the other piece that we think about there, and I think Pete sort of touched on this when talking about like making it easier for the folks who are the program administrators. How do we not only make it easier for the program administrators to understand like where that impact can be maximized, but also on the nonprofit side, how do we make it easier for them to receive those funds from our funding partners and make those funds easier, right? Like, there's a big difference between how a nonprofit, like the Red Cross, for example, they have more resources to kind of direct the fundings and sort of do their administrative work than a small sort of volunteer-led community-based organization. But how do we provide tools and provide that sort of network connection between those two sides of the coin across Bonterra to make the folks who are volunteer-led nonprofits be as efficient or effective potentially as a Red Cross, right? Yep. How do we democratize where we have impact, I guess, is one way to think about it. So that's sort of where I think about impact overall and how we create those connections. And I think this is from our perspective is how do we bring funders closer to those organizations that drive impact in their communities?
Yeah, absolutely. And funders are, individuals inside companies. Funders are, others that are, the philanthropy, the foundation, and it's interesting because I think as we know, the funds can be philanthropy funds, but one of the things that we also tap into are rewards and recognition dollars, and how rewards and recognition dollars can get directed to established 501c3 not-for-profits or things that look like not-for-profits, like carbon offsets, and function like that in this world. And so that direction, in a corporate environment is not just the philanthropy dollars that have been allocated. There's billions of dollars in rewards and recognition that many employees want to do something to make the world a better place with. And so how do we enable and facilitate that and bring those folks into the ecosystem as well, which is really exciting to me. All right, let's turn to, we have a group of people here who have as their job usually to design and run and get participation and prove the business case. We have a question about that, of their programs. So let's go into, if we had to walk in those folks' shoes for the rest of this year and into next year, what are a few things that you would do that to make their programs more compelling, more irresistible, and more impactful over the next 6 to 12 months? So Pete, we're going to start with you. Okay.
Well, first thing, I would know why you're doing it. Not just because some executive asked you to. That's not the answer. What is the objective? Is it new participants? Is it we're trying to impact this particular strategic partner? We're trying to raise awareness. What are you trying to do? And then work backwards from there. And how are you going to measure it? And the business case point, the business cases that I see, you all work for corporations or enterprises that, this is an investment, and what is the expected outcome and how are you going to measure that? So I think just the fundamentals of the business case right there go a long way. And then I think we all know the stats on, engaged employees and productivity and reduction in sick time and retention, a lot of things that matter to CXOs and boards right now. The work that you all are doing ties very much back to that. So what are we trying to accomplish? How are we going to measure it? What does that look like? What do we expect? And then sort of here's why it matters. Again, the details under which require more conversation. Specific to irresistible, impactful programs, Susan, I would highlight, I guess, 3 things. So one, either ride a wave that's already out there. And what I mean by that is there already something that if, let's say we're trying to increase participation, we're going to drive 5% increase in new participants in Q4. We want to do that. I would probably tie something to Giving Tuesday because there's a ton of activity and there's a wave around that in the marketplace that you can ride around comms and visibility and excitement that's already out there. So if what you're trying to do can be tied to something that's already a thing in this domain, great. Otherwise, be patient. And how are you going to build the wave? And that might take years to build an effective program. What does that look like? What are your milestones? So I'd say number one, determine, can you ride a wave or do you have to build a wave? Underneath that, and so Susan, you were just touching on this. I think the best programs offer choice for, can I bring my money to this program? Can I bring my time to this program? Can I bring my voice to this program? And then what corporate or enterprise sort of enrichments exist to incent me? A match, a volunteer event grant, PTO time off to do something, right? So have options for how someone can participate, and then what are the incentives around that? That's point number 2. Again, that may sound obvious. We see a lot of single-threaded programs around money only or time only. Best programs are multi-threaded. And by the way, for those of you running grant programs, you can tie grant making into this as well. Third piece, which is obvious, right? Communicate again, measure somewhere in there, and then communicate again. And when you're communicating, it's not just about the engagement. Communicate stories. Someone that participated last year, what was an outcome? An outcome from a nonprofit partner. Communicate stories. Make it real, visceral. So anyway, I'm not sure, Susan, I said anything that no one's ever heard before, but hopefully that helps. Lauren?
I think really good advice. And one of my favorite stats from my world of marketing is around reach and frequency, which for some reason sometimes gets forgotten in corporate America, especially 7 times, or more in some cases. So I'm with you on point 3. Lauren, what about, you're sitting in shoes, advising, saying, here's what I think you want to focus on the next 6 to 12 months. What would you tell people?
So not surprisingly, Pete shared some of the same things that I would say, right, in terms of, I really was centering on storytelling, because I think it kind of goes to that same overall theme of communication. But I think about what story, well, let me back up. I think it's more, think about what is the outcome that you want to get to for the second half of the year. And I kind of always think about Giving Tuesday because it's such a milestone, marquee, kind of really social, impactful event that occurs in Q4. And I'll get to sort of, I think Pete's comment about it not just being about giving is really key as well. But if you think about a Giving Tuesday as just being kind of a low-hanging fruit opportunity in terms of harvesting engagement and participation from your employees, what is the outcome you want to drive to for it? And then what are those stories that you want to tell to sort of juice participation? And to kind of make it really sort of a marquee event at your company. I would say, what have you done in the past that has been those social impact stories? Again, a lot of this is similar to what Pete just shared. So we were kind of thinking on the same page in terms of what are stories or what are outcomes that you achieved last year that you want to highlight as sort of leading up into promoting this campaign for this year. I think the other piece of it too, where yes, Giving Tuesday is about giving. First of all, your employees are probably, if they're not giving, like if you're not aware they're giving, they're probably giving, right? They might just not be doing it in a way that you're aware of. So that's where I think that 7 times promoting it early and often is critical. So that way you can harness what folks are probably doing on their own, like through Instagram or whatever they're seeing on social media, tie it into their work. But what I would also say is that analysis or understanding of what drove people to, what drives engagement overall at your company is really important. We talked earlier about looking at the folks that don't engage, but do you have people that are really, really involved in sustainability campaigns who you know they're already engaged with your organization? That might mean they're more ripe for participation in giving or volunteerism. So I think understanding where people are engaged and how that can drive overall sort of increase in participation across the organization is really important. That is also, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, one of the themes that we're looking at across Bonterra, which is how do we leverage sort of AI and machine learning to better understand where participation might come from. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and still a lot to do in that space. The other thing I would look at is who are your champions internally, right? Like we know that like the roles that everyone on this call plays, like there's just not enough hours in the day to get everything done. So who are the folks that you've got internally who are hand raisers, or these could be your ERG leaders, or these could be your volunteer captains? Like who are those folks, and get them to sort of be kind of your team to help you think about how you can make a more effective campaign or sort of juice participation in the second half of the year around Giving Tuesday. And then kind of, again, tied to sort of people are giving anyway, how do you reduce the friction and make it easier for people to participate within your organization? That's sort of the technology piece that Susan mentioned earlier when talking about ERGs, is getting folks to understand and use the tools that they have available to you, whether it's WeSpire, whether it's cyber grants, whether it's something else, and make it easier, because then you're capturing data, right? And that makes it easier to tell the story next year or for the next.
Absolutely. The ones I would add, I would +1, 100%, positive emoji, what you both said. One is that we see extraordinary increases in participation when executives get involved. And so as a leader in an organization, as a manager, as a supervisor, as a ERG leader, if you have any formal or informal leadership role, people are watching what you do. And the more you get senior people and leaders in the organization involved, the more it sends both encouragement and permission for others to get involved as well. And so whenever you start to get leadership there, we see big spikes. The second would be to look for those, what we refer to as intersectionality points with your other programs. So if you are a sustainability program, how do you start to think strategically about which not-for-profits you want some of your sustainability work to learn from, lean on, benefit? I've seen, for example, some of our customers have incredible partnerships with the Lauren McCarthy Foundation around plastic use, with ocean-based organizations that they do big things around World Oceans Day with. One of my favorite programs at one of our clients that's a CSR sustainability program is called Souls for Souls. And it's a big both online and in-person effort to explain the circular economy by bringing in shoes for people who don't have them, and it's both online and offline. The last thing that I would just really share is that all of our data shows that when employees do these things together in relationship, so when they go together to volunteer, or when they together are making decisions about where to place funds, Lauren, your example of Girls Whose Code and the volunteering plus the giving is exactly this. But when there's a relationship with the recipients and relationship with each other as colleagues, not only then are you providing social impact, that's where we see the real spikes on likelihood to recommend the company and retention are these when people volunteer together or give together or, go together with an ERG in a community organization or things like that. And then last, when we built our ESG engagement maturity model, really helping companies understand what to do to go to the sort of that transformative place around engagement, that last column where you are at transformational, you are getting your customers involved, you are getting your suppliers involved, and you are looking at your ecosystem effect, not just your internal effect. And so even if it's just a baby step, by opening up a giving day program partnership, et cetera, with maybe 3 strategic not-for-profits to your customers and partners in the back half of the year, or doing something. One of our customers does Servapalooza, and they invite their partners and customers in. We've even gone to do some of the volunteering. That's when you start to reach that transformative level of engagement that makes it irresistible for employees and people to want to be involved. So we're going to open it up to a few questions now. An excellent question that I'm sure we're all wrestling with, which is, how would you suggest countering the implications of the anti-ESG, anti-D&I rhetoric and the effect it's having on our programs? So
I'm actually writing an answer. Oh, go ahead, Lauren. I just wrote an answer and typed it in, but feel free.
Oh, no, go ahead. Pete, you start.
Yeah, look, I think this is the world we live in right now. But here's what I would say: don't get lost in 3-letter acronyms. Focus on the outcome. You can focus on improving homelessness, reducing child hunger, reducing carbon footprints without getting lost in the noise of this or that. Right? I would say we see some movement away from it, maybe an over marketing of ESG, and then a refocus on, it's important to our company to have a healthy community, or to have a future STEM workforce. Focus on the outcome, and that's fine, and that's obvious. And I think you just transcend the negativity by taking that approach. Lauren?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, to Pete's point, there's a lot of focus on an acronym or the debate around reporting, and which is all important. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone is going to disagree that what the outcomes that we're trying to drive, or that we as a sort of global ecosystem are trying to drive are wrong. If you think about the sustainable development goals from the UN, people, prosperity, that's the mission. That's something that we should all be striving for, and those outcomes focused on it. So again, focus on sort of the big picture and those outcomes and the impact, and less on the acronyms.
Right. And I think to keep many people don't know is that, ESG is a Wall Street term to explain frameworks for measuring risk and managing risk and opportunities. And it is a measurement framework for risks and opportunities. And I don't think anybody can argue with having measurement frameworks for risk and opportunities. And so if you move away from the acronym and measure and think instead, what are we doing? We're looking to, understand risk and understand opportunity related to environmental factors, social factors, and governance factors in business.
And look, just as a word of encouragement, critics are often outside of the arena of doing the work. So move on, do the work.
One of the questions that came from the audience is, can you talk about how this Bonterra platform broadly, and the not-for-profit ecosystem is starting to make its way into products? And Lauren, I think you are probably best to answer that question of just where is and how are that not-for-profit expertise starting to really connect into the CSR platform?
Yeah, well, I think, so for those who aren't as familiar with Cyber Grants on the call, so Cyber Grants has long had a sort of nonprofit portal, which is how we connect nonprofits with corporate sort of funders. And so even before the Bonterra environment, we kind of created this nice relationship between the two organizations in terms of how funds are distributed to those organizations from corporate giving or from grant making. Now that we have Bonterra as part of our family, or we are part of the Bonterra family, I think there's an opportunity, and I mentioned this, alluded to it earlier, is how do we actually reduce the friction in how nonprofits not only seek funding and sort of are awarded funding, how they receive the funding in terms of actual dollars, and then how that funding can sort of be managed and stewarded by the nonprofits. Again, that's bringing those four sort of audiences together. That's where I think we see a unique opportunity. One of the things we like to look at is particularly how do we create what I almost want to think of as a grants marketplace or a funding marketplace, so that organizations and nonprofits can easily share and demonstrate their impact. Funders have an easier way of saying, hey, who's in my community that's really making a lot of great progress and a lot of positivity around reducing food insecurity or whatever the cause might be. Because often we hear, especially for companies that have regional locations, is they want to be able to fund and find organizations within their community that are making a positive impact, but where do they go? Like, how do they find those? So this is a way that I think we can bring that together and create those relationships through our sort of interconnected network. That's what, I'm super excied about pursuing.
Yeah. It is, I think, one of the most exciting parts about it. We had a question about Europe, and one of the things that Kristen from the audience said they're struggling with in Europe is to define and measure social community impact. And how do we measure the S factor on learning and development, employee development, and does employee L&D contribute to the S factor? What are your thoughts, Lauren?
Sorry, I'm sort of trying to read the question and listen to it at the same time. So as a result, I've missed it. So
yes, no, that's okay. It's in the chat, which is why it was a little confusing. So it's really around measuring social community impact and the S factor for learning and development. And how does employee L&D contribute to S in the context of, EU CSRD and things like that?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually throw this back to you, Susan, because I think just for everyone to know what's great about WeSpire is you bring more of sort of the S and the sustainability factor to the company. So I would actually defer to your sort of deeper expertise on this in terms of how you might answer it.
Yeah, so Kristen, I think the reality is we're still really trying to get our handle around what EU CSRD specifically is going to sort of cover and not cover on this front. But most of the frameworks do ask at least some cursory questions about investment, employee learning and development, and professional development. And sometimes there's a filter and they want to know what it's in. And so it may be questions around learning and development tied to D&I, or learning and development tied to cybersecurity, or learning and development tied to governance factors or things like that. And so L&D plays a role. I think you have to get into what is the L&D about to determine whether it's really going to be part of the CSR framework. I don't think they're going to, as important as it is, I don't think sales training, for example, would necessarily be part of your ESG framework reporting, but training your salespeople on GDPR and other compliance metrics probably does fall into something related to governance and good governance and employee training. I know there's other things that I know care about L&D that we've had to report out on. For example, EcoVadis is an assessment for supply chains to look at ESG factors in supply chains. And I know that we were asked to report out, the activities that we were doing for employees in some of these areas. And it was kind of fun. I actually used WeSpire for that, which was a fun use case. So more coming on that front. L&D plays a role, but I think it's going to be what are you doing for L&D that is aligned with ESG more specifically that's going to get asked. Any other final questions from folks today? You've been a super interactive audience and we really appreciate it. Business case. I know that there was still an open question around business case. And so I just thought I would address how I encourage our clients to think about business case for their impact programs. First and foremost, these programs definitely have an impact on corporate reputation. And if you do them well, they will have a really good impact on corporate reputation. Patagonia being a really, really great instance. And remember, your brand and your reputation is an asset on your balance sheet. And you can look at how these factors are influencing brand. We do have clients who have been able to connect their programs to customer loyalty and revenue growth, and be able to see that by engaging in their employees in their sustainability efforts or their social impact efforts or their D&I efforts, they're able to attract and retain customers better as a result of these programs. And that is obviously a hugely powerful metric when you can show a P&L impact. Sustainability particularly has a very hard ROI on energy, waste, water, and fuel in resource-intensive businesses, whether that's hospitality or manufacturing or things like that. So that's part of the hard ROI. If you are resource intensive, I would encourage you to use that as a metric. And then near and dear to my heart is obviously the ability to attract and retain talent and talent to develop in your organization. And we've seen staggering improvements in employee retention when social impact programs in particular have been brought to frontline hourly workers. And especially even in organizations that already had really strong brand around impact and things like that. And so your ability to attract and retain talent improves with these programs. And that is a hard ROI in recruiting costs and training costs and in productivity and all of that. So, you know, whether it's your revenue growth and your customer loyalty, whether it's your cost base in some of these programs, whether, you know, or whether it's your brand and that asset value on the balance sheet, they are incredibly impactful. And so learning how to tell that story both in advance, but then most importantly, after the fact, so you can prove that these programs are happening is why Lauren and I spend all the time we do designing and developing good products and trying to make them better all the time. And I know we've been asked about a lot of things around what we're going to do. And the truth is that Lauren and I are still working with our teams to figure out all of the answers to those questions. So there will continue to be WeSpire Lives where you will continue to learn. There will continue to be opportunities to connect with Bonterra more to continue to learn. And we'll look forward to sharing this exciting future with you all over the coming years. So thank you very much, Lauren. And I know Pete sends his goodbyes. He had a hard stop a little bit earlier, but loved getting to know you. And I am looking forward to having all of you back next month. We'll unveil our guest next week, but it's super exciting. So see you next month.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet everyone.